Good morning, Pete, North Las Vegas. We're going to get this Colt 727 Legacy clone-ish retro finished up. We're going to finish up the lower. And first thing we're going to do is install the buffer tube and stock. And we have some things to talk about. If you're new to the AR platform, or especially carbines, there's some things that we got to know. So we're going to start off by saying there is two versions of these buffer tubes. There's a mil-spec dimension and there's a commercial spec dimension. And it can be important as to which one you have, because some butt stocks will only fit a commercial and some butt stocks will only fit a mil-spec. Now generally a commercial butt stock will slide over a mil-spec buffer tube, but it's going to be loose. And usually when you buy a Magpul buttstock, they send you this information here. And we're going to talk about how you can kind of visually tell what you have, but the only way to know for sure what you have is to measure it. And I'm going to show you why, because I just happen to have a commercial tube that's an exception to what Magpul is telling you down here in the write-up. And so let's get started with that. Okay, so one of the ways you can tell whether you have a mil-spec or a commercial tube is how the threads are cut. And on this mil-spec H&R, you can see that the full cut threads, before we get down into the partially cut threads, this diameter here will be taller than the tube. And that generally indicates, like I said, none of this is carved in stone. The only way you really know is to measure it. But this is one way visually you can tell if you have a mil-spec versus a commercial tube. Okay, so now, like I said, on my old Bushmaster here, we have a commercial tube. And you can see how the threads are cut on a commercial tube. They're the same diameter as the tube. So there's no step up or transition. So visually, this is one way you may be able to tell that you have a mil-spec tube without measuring. Okay, so if you go by what Magpul is saying here, and they're right most of the time, but like I said, there are exceptions, and I'm getting ready to show you this. You can see right here what they're saying is that the back of the buffer tube will usually be slanted. And what they're talking about is this area back here will be cut at an angle on most commercial tubes. But this is a commercial tube, and I'll go ahead and measure it for you here later on, and I'll prove it to you. But you can see that this is straight cut. It doesn't have an angle cut. So if you're just going to visually look at that and say, well, it's not angle cut, so it must be mil-spec, this is an exception. And this is what Bushmaster did back in the early mid-90s. And seeing how I have this off, what I'll do is I'll put this on the mil-spec tube just to show you how loose it's going to be. Okay, so this is my all aluminum Bushmaster sitting on top of a mil-spec HR, and you can see how loose it is, and it'll work. I mean, it'll slide back and forth and it'll lock into the holes. And then here's the mil-spec H&R, and it won't even begin to go on the Bushmaster, the commercial spec Bushmaster. It's not going to fit on there. Okay, so we covered the differences between mil-spec and commercial and actually showed it. And what I'll do is I'll measure this, and we'll see where we come in as far as what Magpul's saying here. So this is the H&R, and we're like right on the money as far as tube diameter for mil-spec. 1.15, 1.15. So good job, H&R. Okay, so this is my old Bushmaster with the commercial tube. You can see we're pretty close to that 1.17 for a commercial spec tube. Okay, so like I said, the only way you're going to really know for sure is by measuring. You can see that visually that some things mentioned with the Magpul directions. I mean, they are accurate. They say some are not slant cut and some are slant cut. So, but you just can't rely on things visually. All right, I beat that one to death. Spring and retainer. Put a little grease on the spring and inside the retainer and push that up and down. Make sure it goes up and down freely. There's nothing hanging up. Okay, now we just got to put a little grease on this and screw it in. And make sure the edge captures the retainer, which I'll showcase here in just a second. Okay, we're almost there, about another turn or two, and we'll be able to capture that retainer. Something I forgot to mention, because I did the set screw modification back here, we don't have to worry about the spring and the rear takedown pin. So one less worry. Okay, so let's get this thing captured. So on this receiver buffer combo, we're running a little bit tight. There's a little bit more contact from the buffer to the retainer pin than I'm used to seeing. I mean, it still goes up and down. It's not hanging up. But we're pretty snug up against that retainer pin. And if I back this tube out anymore, then it does not capture the retainer. So that is what it is. And looking from the back, you can see we're straight up and down. So I didn't go too far. That's the first one I've ever had where the edge of the buffer tube was actually rubbing up against the retainer. But overall, it's not a bad fitment. You can see that the buffer tube is even with the edge of the receiver, so that part's good. That'll eventually wear in a little bit once the Parkerizing smooths out. Like I said, it still goes up and down. It's not getting hung up, so we're good. So this is another area that I'm not quite sure about on the Colt 727s. I don't know if the originals came with these staking notches on the spanner ring. And if I look at my old Bushmaster, there's no notches. So back when I put this rifle together, they did not expect anybody to stake the spanner ring. So like I said, for the Colt 727, I don't know if that's correct or not. The original, maybe the early 727s did not have those notches. And then maybe later on in the late 727s, they started notching the spanner ring. But anyway, if you get the H&R Car 15 buttstock kit, the spanner ring is going to come with the notches. So the torque spec for an A2, a full-length rifle, to where you're just cranking on the buffer tube itself, you don't have a locking ring, they're saying 39 foot-pounds. But because this is a carbine and I'm using a locking ring, I'm going to use a little bit less torque. I don't know what the actual spec is for a spanner ring versus a castle nut, but I'm going to probably torque this around 25 is going to be the most I want to go. And this is just my personal thoughts. I don't know what the actual spanner ring spec is, but it can't be as much as an actual 20-inch rifle, and I can't see where it's going to be as much as a castle nut, because on a castle nut, you've got 3 places on most of your wrenches that grab a hold of the castle nut. On a spanner ring, I've only got 1 pin to grab a hold of it. So I don't want to put too much torque on it. And while we're on the discussion between spanner ring and castle nut, a lot of your armor wrenches only come with the castle nut. They don't give you provisions for a spanner ring. And I forget who I got this from. Oh, I got it from Patent US. Just kidding. I don't know who made this one. I bought it quite some time ago. But anyway, like I said, not all wrenches have the spanner provision. So I'm gonna take this thing out to the garage, and we're gonna torque that on to about 25 foot-pounds is where I'm gonna go. And if it comes loose, the next time I torque it, I'll put some more on it. So before I torque this spanner ring on, I forgot to mention in the previous clip, before I get this all tightened up, I'm going to put that buffer and buffer spring in, and we're going to mate up the upper receiver with the bolt carrier group in it, and make sure that when I close the two halves, that bolt carrier pushes the buffer off the pin. And if it does, we're good. If it doesn't, I have what's called an offset retainer pin that will allow the buffer to come out a little bit further so that the BCG will get correct engagement and push the buffer off the retaining pin. The only time that buffer is supposed to touch that retaining pin is when the receiver halves are split apart. If your buffer's touching that retainer pin with the two halves close together, that means it's going to be touching while you're firing the rifle, and you're either going to break the pin, or you're going to damage the rifle, or you're going to wallow out the hole in your receiver, or you may have a catastrophic failure. So I know I'm kind of repeating myself, but the only time the buffer, okay, the only time this buffer is supposed to touch that retainer pin is when you split the receiver halves. That's its only purpose. Keep the buffer and spring from popping out when you're taking your rifle apart. So one way you can tell without putting the pins in is just to put your upper on top of the lower, and you can kind of look in there and see where the pinhole relationships are. And you can see that the buffer is lifting the receiver off the back. And if I put a little pressure on it to line the front pinhole up, you can see where the buffer is being pushed off the retainer pin without even looking at it. But we're going to put the pin in, and we're going to take a close-up and make sure that that buffer is coming off the retainer pin. Okay, we got the front pin in, and we can see back here that the BCG is already making contact with the buffer. And I'm going to try to do this one-handed and get it on camera. Too lazy to set up my tripod. Anyway, as we come down, we should be able to see that the buffer is coming off of the retainer pin. And you can see right there the buffer is off of the retaining pin. And as we come further down, it'll move further back. Okay, so that's good. That's how it should be. Another check you might want to do on your buffer setup is shove this bolt carrier group all the way in as far as you can, compress it, and make sure that you have enough clearance between your gas key and the receiver. Now, I've never put together a rifle where this has ever been a problem, but probably the first time I don't check it, that's when I'm going to have the problem. Some of these are very close to the receiver and can cause damage. One of the tricks I've seen or heard about is people will put a couple of quarters back here, and that will prevent the gas key from hitting your receiver. And I don't know if that's how I would fix it, but I guess that's an option. All right, so now I'm going to go torque that spanner. Getting ready to put the bolt catch release in, and I've already inspected the pin, and sometimes these will be all boogered up and they won't be properly finished and chewed up, and you might want to dress your pin up with a file just to make sure that you don't chew up the aluminum. My favorite is electrical tape for this part here. It takes a lot more to bust through the electrical tape and ruin the finish on the receiver. And I run the electrical tape right up to the very edge of the hole, because a lot of times as you're trying to get this pin recessed, you'll get some shiny metal down here from your punch. I am using a pin starter that has a hole in it just to kind of get it going. Just very gently tap it in at the beginning, and then we'll be using the correct the correct roll pin punch. You can see the tip or the nipple on there, whatever you want to call it. Nipple, I don't like using that. Tip. So I have the pin started, and you can see on my flat-sided roll pin starter, I'm starting to run out of room here. I'm getting ready to hit the receiver. So it's time to get the detent spring and the catch in there and switch over to the roll pin punch. flat-sided. Spring is in. Our detemp plunger is sitting on top of the spring. We're going to slide this bolt catch in here and tap the pin in the rest of the way. Now, it might help if you run a punch through this way and get everything located on this side while you're tapping the pin in, but I generally don't have to do that. I got a pretty good feel for when the pin is starting into the hole. And what I'll do is I'll gently tap it until it just starts to engage, and then I can feel that it's lined up, and then I'll start wailing on it. Just kidding. Always tap gently. So the pin's in most of the way, and it's just starting to engage on the other side of the receiver. As you're tapping this in, you're going to feel a little bit more resistance, but if that pin doesn't want to move and you start really having to tap on it harder, something's wrong. You know, it's not lined up on the other side. There's some kind of interference. At that point, you just need to stop. And, you know, if you can't get things aligned, then you come in and punch your pin back out and try to figure out what's going on. But anyway, we're almost there. Okay, I did not cheat off camera and touch any shiny metal up. That's what that hole looked like after I put the pin in. Nice smooth operation. Sometimes these hang up a little bit, especially when they're brand new. But that turned out very nice. Let me get the tape off and we'll take another look to see if there's something underneath that happened. It's about as good as it gets, for me anyway. I've been going back and forth on this one for a while. I have some ARs with the Geisley two-stage, the SSA, not the SSAE. I don't like too light of a trigger pull. I don't like a real heavy one either. These generally come in around 3.5, 4 pounds. But I kind of finally made up my mind. I prefer single stage. I just do. I know a lot of you guys out there like the two-stage stuff, especially if you're competing and in competitions and maybe bench rest type shooting or whatever, but this is what I'm going to put in. Mil spec for your pins is 0.154. These are coming in about 0.155, which is good. So long as they fit in the receiver, then being 1,000th over will be a nice snug fit. Okay, so I've already measured this one, and we'll use this as our pin gauge, and we'll make sure that it goes all the way through the receiver to the other side. And there is no slop at all, so these are nice snug fits. All right, we have our slave pin installed, keeping our disconnector and our trigger together. We'll slide this in and tap our pin in. It doesn't matter which side of the receiver you tap your pins in, but what I would recommend is that the side with the outside groove on it, that's going to be the side that you tap on, and the side that doesn't have the outside groove on it, that's the way you want to start them. Now on the trigger, that's not going to matter too much, but when we get to the hammer, it makes getting the hammer pin in a little bit easier to get past the J-hook spring inside. And when we get to installing the hammer, I'll go over that a little bit more and try to show you the spring that's inside that hammer. Okay, so that's your J-hook spring inside the bore there. And that's what locks your hammer pin into the hammer. And I generally don't use a slave pin for the hammer. It just makes it kind of a pain in the ass. Really, you only need the slave pin, well, for me anyway, for the trigger. But that's why I was saying on the pin here, when you put it in your hammer, if you start your pin with the groove on the outside, it falls into that spring and kind of locks the pin up a little bit, and then you got to tap it harder to get it past to where that J-hook spring locks into the center groove. So that's why I was saying, for me, it's a little easier to start the pins, especially on the hammer, going this way. So as you're tapping your pin in through the hammer, it's almost never lined up on the other side because of the spring leg tension. So generally, once you get your pin in, you kind of have to push down on the hammer a little bit and off to one side, and that'll get you a line to where you can tap it in. And you can see the spring legs are sitting on top of the trigger pin, and it is correctly located in the groove. So we'll do some testing. Well, that's good. That hurt. Man, that's a mean spring you got there, Geisley. Okay, I'm going to do the reset check. We'll go into safe, make sure that works. And like I said, I'll do the reset check off camera. But all right, well, all we got to do is put the two halves together and take a look at this thing. Colt 727, U.S. Army Rangers and Navy SEALs. This was the last carbine variant before the M4. Now, they were making the XM4, to my understanding, towards the later years of the 727. And so we'll talk about the build, what's correct and what's not correct, or as close as I could get it. Colt 27 came with an A2 compensator. They also use peel washers. I just used some shims, and almost looks like a peel washer. What is not correct is the crush washer. This is a Colt barrel, so that would be correct. However, it's a newer cage code barrel, which is incorrect. And the other thing that's wrong about this particular build is this is a 16-inch barrel. The original 727 used a 14.5-inch barrel. My understanding is on the early 727s, this grenade launcher cut may not have been the standard M4 cut. And this particular barrel here, this is the standard M4 cut. So on an early 727, they did have the grenade launcher cut, but the profile was a little different, the angle here, and I believe the length. I think maybe towards the end of the 727's run, the late 727s may have gone to the standardized M4 or XM4 grenade launcher cuts. The 727, according to my research, did come with the round handguard end cap, but it also had the grenade launcher cuts. And my old 94 Colt came with the cuts also. The Colt 727s used a standard height A2 front sight base. And that's because they also used an A2 fixed carry handle. Now you'll see on my detachable, my Colt upper here, it uses an F marked. See the F in here. The difference between F and a standard is 40 thousandths. The F marked is 40 thousandths taller from the top of the barrel to the shelf. They both use the same standard A2 front sight post. It's just the base that's, the height is different. Had a hard time finding a completed barrel with the M4 profile that did not have an F marked. So I ended up having to buy a strip barrel. I got this particular Colt barrel from Midway, one of the few places I found with a stripped M4 profile. And then I had this standard A2 mounted by John Thomas of Retro Arms Works. The 727s, as far as I could tell from my research, came with the notched handguard end caps. They also came with the skinny single heat shield handguards, the 6 holes. As far as I know, they never ever came with a 7-hole. That's a commercial aftermarket thing. I'm not saying that maybe some military rifle somewhere didn't have 7 holes, but the original Colt handguards for the 727 were 6 holes. 727 also came with a delta ring, not the straight slip ring, but a delta ring. A2 fixed carry handle with 8.3 markings on your elevation drum. Flat top, 6.3. For the receiver, the 727 would have had the Colt Pony. H&R never made A2s. They only made M16A1s. being marked M16A2 is correct. Not having the property of U.S. government, that's also correct. And these were configured for full auto. Pretty sure the 727s did not have a tick mark on the selector for the right side of the rifle. Could be wrong about that, but I don't think they had a tick mark. Spanner ring, we already talked about the staking notches. Not sure if the 727 had those or not, but this is what the H&R kit came with, so it might be correct. The early 727s had 2 position. My understanding is that later on, they may have gone to 4 position about the same time the XM4 came onto the scene, and then definitely the M4. I'm just going to put a standard sling on it, nothing fancy. Trying to give it that retro legacy vibe. I'm going to try to get this out next week. I have a standard buffer in it. I have an H1, and I'll probably buy an H2 just to see which buffer it ends up liking the best. Anyway, Pete in North Las Vegas. Over and out.